Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 502, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Got a lot of news on today's show, but first I want to start off by letting everybody know that at the Libertarian Institute, we are kicking off our end of the year fundraiser. So we need to get a little bit of money coming in to keep the place open, so I can keep bringing you this show, writing all the articles that I'm writing, and all the other great stuff we do at the Institute. We've published quite a few books in the past year. We have new books coming out, one by James Bovard, one by Tom Woods. Of course, Scott Horton's forthcoming book, Provoked, on the new Cold War with Russia, will be published through the Institute. Keith Knight has published a book at the Institute in the past year. Joseph Solis Mullen has a recent great new book on the fake China threat. So please head on over to the Institute, make a donation, help us out. We do a lot of really important work at the Institute, and any donation that you make helps us to continue to do that. And with that, just want to remind people that you can share the show. We are hosted at the Libertarian Institute, of course. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. And then you can find the show up anywhere you listen to audio podcasts, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. Let's get into the news. First up here on today's show, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visits Ukraine, announces a $100 million arms package. So he made an unannounced visit to Kiev on Monday, where he announced a new $100 million arms package for Ukraine and insisted that the U.S. would provide long-term support for the war against Russia, despite growing signs to the contrary. Austin told reporters, "I announced today another $100 million drawdown using the Presidential Drawdown Authority to provide additional artillery munitions, additional interceptors for air defenses, and a number of anti-tank weaponry as well. The Presidential Drawdown Authority allows the U.S. to ship weapons to Ukraine directly from Pentagon stockpiles. The U.S. has about $5 billion left in the PDA to arm Ukraine, which became available due to a Pentagon, what they call accounting error, that overvalued the previous arms shipments." I think this is important to realize that had it not been for this accounting error, the White House would be out of money to wage this proxy war. And so with this, what I think is invented money, my understanding from what I pieced together how the PDA funding works, Congress allocates money to the PDA. So let's say the president uses the Presidential Drawdown Authority to send arms to any country in the world, right? And he sends those arms directly from American stockpiles. So he sends 3 tanks. Now, how I believe the Presidential Drawdown Authority is supposed to work, the funding for sending those 3 tanks is not necessarily the value of those particular tanks, but the value to replace those tanks, right? And so whatever the cost is to develop the new tank and put in the American stockpile is what we would have to pay. But the Pentagon, I believe, when they announced this county error, they adjusted this and they came up with about $6.2 billion difference in what the value of the equipment is versus what it costs to replace that equipment. And so they freed up a lot of money for themselves to continue to do this by making that very important change that they did. All other types of assistance for Ukraine have dried up, and Congress has yet to authorize President Biden's request for an additional $61 billion to fund the war for another year. Many members of Congress are now more focused on ensuring more military aid is sent to Israel to support its campaign in Gaza. Ukrainian President Zelensky said he's seen a decrease in U.S. artillery shell shipment since the outbreak of the war in Gaza. And, one thing that is interesting about this current arms package is they're sending one HIMARS launcher system and also additional ammunition. But why they allocated one is kind of a head scratcher. I get maybe that's all they had available. Maybe that's all Ukraine needed. But typically don't see them just sending one of any weapon. All right, next up here, I wrote this article for the Libertarian Institute on November 21st. Germany commits $1.4 billion to Ukrainian war effort. Berlin has pledged to send Kiev $1.4 billion in weapons to aid its war against Russia. The announcement of the German arms package comes as the White House is nearing depleting the funds allocated by Congress for Ukraine. The German defense minister Boris Pistorius rolled out the arms package on Tuesday in Kiev. Pistorius' trip to Ukraine followed the U.S. Secretary of State Defense Lloyd Austin's visit to Kiev on Monday. Austin committed additional $100 million in military aid to Ukraine. According to Berlin, the German security assistance includes air defense interceptors, anti-tank mines, and artillery shells. Pistorius said, although this is a package worth 1.3 billion euros, or like I said before, $1.4 billion, I am quite sure that this will help you in your fight against Russian aggression. We stand with Ukraine reliably. We are talking about 20,000 additional shells. Artillery shells have been one of the highest demand weapons for Ukraine since the start of the war. Washington has sent over 2 million 155 millimeter rounds since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. However, the White House's ability to continue to arm Ukraine may be waning. American weapons stockpiles have been nearing redline levels, and the Biden administration has nearly depleted the funds allocated by Congress to fight the proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have been firing 155 millimeter shells far faster than the West can produce them. Kiev soldiers are currently firing about 250,000 rounds, 240,000 rounds a month, a rate that far outpaces what the U.S. and Western allies could produce. And this is a problem that they do not have in Russia. They've been able to ramp up the production of shells quite successfully. The Ukrainian President Zelensky explained Kiev stockpiles are dwindling. He said, our stockpiles have decreased. It is life. It is normal as everyone's fighting for survival. Over the past 6 weeks, Israel has begun receiving shipments of 155 millimeter shells, adding pressure to the already strained supply. To make up for the shrinking stockpiles, the White House has sent cluster variants of artillery weapons to both Kiev and Tel Aviv. The shipments violate U.S. laws. International treaties have banned cluster bombs because they continue to kill civilians for years after conflicts end. So I'm thinking either sometime later this week or next week, I will have to do a show that's a little bit more in depth on the possibility of negotiating, resuming, and maybe the possibility that we're seeing some Western pressure on Ukraine to at least start thinking about negotiating. I'm not so sure about this. I've been focusing a lot more on the situation in Gaza than on the day-to-day situation in Ukraine over the past month, really. And so I want to take some time to really get down, read all the statements that are being made by the NATO officials, by American officials, by European officials. I did see that Turkey said that they were ready to resume talks, which is maybe one of the more encouraging signs, because Turkey nearly successfully was able to lead some diplomacy earlier on in the conflict. And so that could be encouraging, although I'm not too particularly optimistic given the fact that Zelensky is still in charge in Kiev, that we are really all that close to ending the war. And the rhetoric from the West, at least publicly directed at the people, is often like what Lloyd Austin says, which is we continue our commitment to Ukraine and we remain firmly committed to Ukraine. All right, here, next up, U.S. deploys previously banned missile to aim them at China. The U.S. military will deploy a new medium-range missile system to the Pacific region next year for the purposes of deterring China from invading Taiwan, the commander of the U.S. Army's Pacific Forces said on Saturday. According to Defense One, General Charles Flynn said the deployment will include land-based version of the Tomahawk missile, which was previously banned under the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was an agreement between the U.S. and Russia that the U.S. withdrew from in 2019. Flynn said, we have tested them and we have a battery or two ready today. In 2024, we intend to deploy them to the region. I'm not going to say where and when, but I will say that we are and we will deploy them. I believe they're looking at deploying them in Japan. Quick update on some Korea news here. The North Koreans have successfully launched their first spy satellite into orbit. The U.S. and its allies strongly condemned North Korea over the launch. I saw that South Korea has now floated, leaving a space agreement with North Korea over this. North Korea says it has a sovereign right to develop a satellite program. And given how many American spy satellites there are, it's kind of hard to argue with the North Koreans' desire to at least have a few of their own. All right, time to talk about the war in Gaza. And sorry, guys, it's all bad news. Gaza health officials say they've lost the ability to count the dead. Health officials in Gaza have told the Associated Press that it's become impossible to count the dead due to a breakdown in communications and the presence of Israeli forces on the ground in northern Gaza. The last official update from the health ministry based in Gaza was released on November 10th, putting the figure at 11,078. Al Jazeera reported on Tuesday that according to Gaza's media office, the current death toll is somewhere over 13,300, including 5,600 children, but that number is not confirmed. And so, when we get to 11,000, we're talking one body, one number. I think when they're talking about the 13,000, they probably say, oh, we buried 100 bodies here or there today, and that's how they're counting them. It's probably a little bit looser as far as how accurate it is. This is a statement from Gaza's health ministry. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Health has not yet been able to issue statistics because there is a breakdown in communications between hospitals and the disruption to the internet. He added that the electronic database used to count the dead is no longer able to count the names and tally the statistics. I'm not sure. Maybe that's because they don't have power. Wasn't clear. President Biden has previously accused the Gaza Health Ministry of lying about the death toll, but a State Department official later said that the numbers are likely low estimates, and that was before communications entirely broke down. The UN and aid groups that work on the ground in Gaza have said that the health ministry is considered reliable. The Gaza Health Ministry would release death tolls based on the number of dead bodies recorded at hospitals and morgues, a meticulous process. After Biden questioned the numbers, the health ministry released a list of names and ages of all the dead Palestinians it had counted up to that point. The death toll was considered low because it didn't take into account the bodies that are stuck under the rubble, a problem that has worsened. According to the AP, Palestinian medics say it's far too dangerous to recover the untold scores of dead bodies in Gaza City, where Israeli bulldozers have blocked streets and tanks fire at anything in their path. The health ministry officials believe the death toll has risen significantly since November 10th, based on the doctor's estimates and people reporting missing family members. People are thrown in the streets. They're under the rubble. We can count the bodies and release the death toll in a press conference, the health ministry official asked. So the Palestinian Health Ministry in the West Bank has also put out the count of 13,300. But Gaza officials say it can't be verified. If there is someone sitting in an air-conditioned office, he can say whatever he wants. But if you come here in the field, no one can work between the tains to count how many people are killed. And so that is just how bad the situation is. I know the death toll is something that really interests people. It's almost one of the first questions I get asked every time. And not having that firm update is going to... I probably allow a lot more room for American and Israeli propaganda to kind of try to dominate the narrative there. All right. So Israeli officials have warned residents of the Jabalia refugee camp, the largest in Gaza, and Khan Yunis, the largest city in southern Gaza, to flee their homes. Tel Aviv's massive bombing campaign against the besieged enclave has already displaced about 3/4 of the 2.3 million residents of Gaza. The White House supports Israel expanding its military operations in the Strip anyways. So this is an article that I wrote for the Institute on November 20th. The United Nations report that 1.7 million of the 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza are now displaced due to Israeli military operations. 900,000 people are taking shelter at UN facilities. In addition, over 13,000 Gazans have been killed, including 5,600 children. 4,000 are missing and potentially dead or dying under the rubble. And when you read the 900,000 Palestinians are sheltering at UN facilities, to understand how strained the facilities are, they say that's one shower for every 700 people and one bathroom for every 150 people. I have no idea how that could even possibly be manageable. So after a Hamas attack on October 7th, Tel Aviv placed the Gaza Strip under total siege. The destruction of medical facilities and other infrastructure, as well as the lack of aid, has created a humanitarian catastrophe. The situation continues to deteriorate as Israel is demanding the evacuation of two densely populated regions of Gaza. On Sunday, the Jabalia refugee camp and a nearby coastal camp were ordered to evacuate. The Israeli military was expanding its operational activities in the additional neighborhoods of the Gaza Strip, an official said. Last week, the Israeli Air Force dropped leaflets on Khan Yunis and instructed residents and internally displaced Gazans to leave their homes for their safety. It is unclear where the Palestinians can flee to, as shelters are already overcrowded. The White House supports Israel expanding its military operations in Gaza, but hopes Tel Aviv will agree to a delay in opening the new fronts. This is from John Feiner, who is the Deputy National Security Council advisor. He said, in the event that we believe that Israel is likely to embark on combat operations, including in the south, we believe that they have the right to do that, but that there is a real concern because hundreds of thousands of residents of Gaza have now fled from the north to the south at Israel's request. We think that their operations should not go forward until those people, those additional civilians, have been accounted for in their military planning. And so we will be conveying that directly to them and have been conveying that to them. And I don't know why the Americans are even bothering to talk to the Israelis, because they're already carrying out airstrikes pretty heavily in these regions. And of course, we hear a lot from the Biden administration, that we're trying to put pressure on the Israelis, we're trying to do this or that, but the U.S. gives Israel a lot of aid, and they refuse absolutely to condition the aid on reducing tensions, reducing hostilities, reducing civilian deaths, or anything like that. All right, next up here, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Iran tells the U.S. it doesn't want Gaza war to escalate into a regional conflict. So the Iranian foreign minister, that's Amir Abdullahian, has said that Iran expressed to the U.S. through back channels that it does not want the Gaza war to escalate into a regional conflict, while also warning escalation was inevitable if Israel does not stop its campaign. The foreign minister said over the past 40 days, messages have been exchanged between Iran and the U.S. via interest in the Swiss embassy in Tehran. In response to the U.S., we said that Iran does not want the war to spread due to the approach adopted by the U.S. and the Israelis in the region. If the crimes against the people of Gaza and the West Bank are not stopped, any possibility could be considered. A wider conflict could prove inevitable. The U.S. has blamed Iran for attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria that started in October due to President Biden's support for the Israeli assault on Gaza. But Tehran has said that it is not responsible, and the U.S. never produced any evidence to show that Iran is directly ordering the attacks. The Iranian foreign minister said that Shia militias in Iraq and Syria are believed to be responsible for the attacks on U.S. bases are not Iranian proxies. He said the same of Hezbollah and other Palestinian militants and the Houthis in Yemen, according to the Financial Times. But when he warned the groups are not indifferent towards the killing of their Muslim Arab peers in Palestine. And so what he's saying is that these groups are acting, kind of on their own interests, and their interests are preventing the deaths of people in Gaza, and the way they feel that they can have an impact on that is by attacking U.S. troops in the Middle East. Not sure how effective it is, but it sure is happening quite a bit. In fact, let's go ahead and talk about this article here. U.S. AC-130 gunship launches strikes in Iraq, casualties reported. So CENTCOM said Tuesday that a U.S. AC-130 gunship launched strikes in Iraq against people allegedly responsible for an earlier missile airstrike on the Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq, which houses U.S. troops. The Pentagon said that 8 U.S. troops were wounded when Al-Assad Air Base was targeted with short-range ballistic missiles, and that the AC-130 responded immediately. CENTCOM said the AC-130 strikes resulted in several enemy casualties. A U.S. official later told the War Zone that the strikes killed at least one member of complete Hezbollah and Iraqi Shia militia. According to AFP, the AC-130 struck a vehicle in the Abu Ghraib region, once the site of the notorious American torture prison. And AC-130 gunships are armed with various types of heavy weapons, including 155 millimeter howitzers. The U.S. airstrikes in Iraq risk significantly escalating tensions on U.S. forces in the region, as of Monday, U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria have come under attack 61 times since October 17th, due to President Biden's full-throated support for the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. And if we look at past attacks, whenever the U.S. bombs these groups, they pretty quickly lash out with attacks of their own on American forces. Next up here, Biden advisor in Israel for talks on preventing Lebanon war. So Amos Hochstein, a senior advisor to President Biden, is in Israel to hold talks with the Israeli officials on preventing a major war with Lebanon, as fighting between Israel and Hezbollah forces across the Israeli-Lebanon border continues to escalate. And, you know, we've talked about this a lot on the show since the start of the war, that this conflict could possibly escalate. And it seems like it's been on a 3 for a couple weeks now, and it's up to like a 4 or 5. So we're definitely at medium heat here. The strikes are escalating, and of course it could be turned down. We haven't reached the point where this is boiling over and turning into a larger war, but you know, even cranking the heat up slowly is still extremely dangerous. And that's what's going on here. It seems that the Israeli strategy is to try to escalate enough to bring the Americans in, and the Hezbollah strategy is to try to be enough of a nuisance to Israel that Israel can't commit its full military force to the destruction of Gaza and I guess maybe the West Bank. So next up, got a couple statements here from Israeli officials that are very disturbing. The Israeli intelligence minister, the Galia Gamaliel, proposed a voluntary resettlement of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to other countries around the world in an op-ed for the Jerusalem Post that was published on Monday. The intelligence minister said that one of the options for Gaza's future is to promote voluntary resettlement of the Palestinians in Gaza for humanitarian reasons outside of the Strip. She called for the international community to foot the bill for relocating the Palestinians instead of funding the UN Relief and Works Agency. So rather than giving money for the Palestinians to live in Palestine, she wants these countries to give money for Palestinians to live elsewhere. And this is just, you know, one of the many calls from Israeli ministers for ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Next up here, we have Major General Galara Aland, and he is the former head of the National Security Council of Israel and an advisor to the defense minister of Israel, and he calls for a genocide in this statement. He said they are not only Hamas fighters with weapons, but also all the, quote, civilian officials, including hospital administrators, school administrators, and the entire Gaza population that enthusiastically supported Hamas and cheered on its atrocities on October 7th. Israel is not fighting a terrorist organization, but against the state of Gaza. Who are the poor women of Gaza? They are mothers, sisters, wives of Hamas murderers. Behind every terrorist stands a dozen men or women without whom he could not engage in terrorism. Now, this also includes the mothers of martyrs who send them to hell with flowers and kisses. They should follow their sons. Nothing more would be just. They should go as should the physical homes in which they raised their states. Otherwise, more little states will be raised there. The international community warns us of humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this, as difficult as it may be. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer and reduce casualties among IDF soldiers. And so he's basically, he is saying create a humanitarian catastrophe, cause this massive cholera outbreak. That way all the Palestinians end up dead and we don't even have to waste our bullets on it. Just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. All right, next up here, this from DataCampAntiwar.com. U.S. shared location of aid groups with Israel. Israel bombed them anyways. So Politico reported on Tuesday that the U.S. has been sharing with Israel location of humanitarian groups in Gaza in an attempt to prevent strikes on the sites, but Israel has been bombing them anyways. The information includes GPS coordinates of a number of medical facilities and the movement of aid groups inside of Gaza. Among the sites the U.S. has shared with Israel was the Al-Shifa hospital, which Israel raided last week, causing the medical facility to cease functioning and the deaths of dozens of patients, including 8 premature babies. The U.S. has tried to deflect blame for Israel's attack on Al-Shifa and other hospitals. The White House has said that it didn't want to see hospitals as battlegrounds, but the U.S. continues to provide unconditional military aid for Israeli operations, despite the massive civilian casualty rate. The Politico report said it was unclear if the U.S. has provided Israel with a list of no strikes or if it's just offering guidance. So there's a difference between saying that these GPS coordinates right here, you will not bomb or you will be cut off from U.S. weapons, versus saying that, hey guys, these are a list of medical facilities, please don't bomb them. And who knows what Israel does with them. Maybe they look at them and say, oh, now we have a new list of targets. Aid workers have said how Israel has abandoned its practices that it used before to prevent attacks on aid groups, which such as the deconfliction line. A senior aid group official told Politico there is no justification for the lack of functioning deconfliction channel with aid groups. The IDF is familiar with deconfliction practices and has put the channel in place in previous conflicts. And so they're saying that Israel is making it harder for the aid groups to let them know where they are. When we talk about attacks on hospitals, and particularly Al-Shifa, we have the tunnels under the hospital, which is the excuse for everything. But now we have the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, saying that the bunkers under the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza were built by Israel decades ago. Israel used the claim that Hamas was using the tunnels under Shifa as its excuse for laying siege to the hospital and bombing the facility. Barak argued that Hamas used the underground shelters. Israel has released video of Shifa Hospital showing some bunkers and a few small arms the IDF says they found in the hospital. But this is really insufficient, especially seeing how Israel built the underground shelters themselves. The fact that they exist is in no way proof that Hamas was using this in any nefarious way. Now, again, as we talked about on the show, I'm sure there were a couple Hamas members at the hospital from time to time, but that certainly does not prove, again, was being used as a headquarters, and that needed to be put under siege and destroyed and put out of complete commission. All right, so next up here, we have a letter from the chief of the Indonesian hospital in Gaza, and he demands that Biden call for a ceasefire. So in this letter, he says that was published on Monday, this is not about religion, ethnicity, or race, but about humanity. Truly real humanitarian crisis occurring in Palestine. All life is precious. We agree that all human life is the most sanctified value on this earth. We reject the targeting of civilians, and we mourn the loss of all civilian life. Gazans are facing death every day. Every 5 minutes, a Palestinian children is killed. Totally unacceptable. Babies, children, women, and the elderly, the disabled, hospitals, ambulances, medics, schools, teachers, residential complexes, worship places, and much more. This is completely genocide and ethnic cleansing. However, it is very unfortunate that and he is saying that, that you're Joe Biden, you are siding with Israel by facilitating weapons of mass destruction, has actually made the conflict even wider. Your actions clearly contradict your various international treaties and agreements that are able to apply to the existence of Palestine. You have destroyed the international rules of the game, insulated the authority of the UN, and torn apart the sense of justice and hurt the human values and tarnished the face of human civilization. We believe, again, that you, as talking to Joe Biden, have a conscience. And if I have any qualms with this letter, is the idea that Joe Biden has a conscience. If he had one, it died a while ago with most of his brain cells. The letter says, your great country certainly wants to be as honorable for its humanitarian defenses. Moreover, your administration has determined to make a principle of multilateralism, justice, and human rights and the foundation of the United States foreign policy. So actually, this is the right to prove it. For the sake of peace and humanity, we demand that you immediately do a ceasefire, restore the dignity of the United States as a country that upholds human rights. The ceasefire must be implemented now so as not to increase the loss of life on both sides. This violates all laws, morals, and ethics of war, which must be upheld in a civilized world. We, the Indonesian people, also the people around the world, will continue to support the struggle and the liberation of Palestinian land from Israeli Zionist colonialism, and the Palestinian people right to return to their homes and land. So pretty powerful letter there. And of course, being directed at Joe Biden, I think is important. Israeli strikes killed 2 journalists in southern Lebanon. So this brings the total number of journalists killed since October 7th to 53. I believe 4 of those are Israeli, 3 are Lebanese, and the rest are Palestinians, mostly in Gaza, maybe some in the West Bank. There's also been 3 journalists missing, and there are a few others, I think 18, that have been arrested. So this is, a serious problem. And of course, it's likely somewhat intentional by Israel to reduce the amount of media coverage of the war crimes that they are committing in Gaza. Now, I'm sure you noticed I didn't talk about or give any updates on the potential ceasefire agreement. Everybody has been saying for about 4 days, it's really close. It's really close. And so maybe it is really close. And by the time even this show comes out, we have a slight pause in the fighting that will lead to the release of about 50 Israeli hostages and 150 Palestinian prisoners. I don't know if both sides. So there's a lot of issues. One is logistical, right? Can Hamas actually produce these prisoners, given the devastation of Gaza, in a fast enough way to make this deal happen? I'm not so sure. Or, just that the hiccups involved in the logistics could lead to the deterioration of this deal, even if it's agreed to initially and there's some attempt to implement it. It might not be able to work itself all the way through. But I think there's a real possibility here that what Israel is essentially doing is stringing the Americans along. This isn't as much about Hezbollah, but making the Americans think that the Israelis are trying to release the hostages is probably good PR from Netanyahu's point of view. So I'm guessing they're working towards that. All right, I think that'll wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll be back with more later in the week.